I was in the middle of wrapping a present for my grandson when the message came through. "Mom, don't come to the party. Sarah's not comfortable with it." My hands froze over the brightly colored paper. I read the words again and again, convinced there had to be some kind of mistake. A terrible misunderstanding. But the message on the screen remained unchanged, stark and clear in its digital finality. It was for my grandson Leo's first birthday. His very first, most precious milestone. I had arranged everything. The reservation at the community hall, the catering, the special cake from the bakery he loved, all of it. It was my contribution, my gift. The total cost came to nearly $2,500. For a woman living on a fixed pension, that was no small sum. It was a significant portion of my savings, a sacrifice I made without a second thought. For his first birthday, I had told myself over and over, I just want the whole family to be together to celebrate. That simple, heartfelt wish had been the engine driving all my efforts, all my careful planning for weeks. And now, I was learning that I wasn't invited to the very celebration I had created. The message said, "Don't come," but my heart heard something far harsher. Something that felt like a door slamming shut in my face. It felt like my son was shouting, "Stay away." A cold hand squeezed my chest, and I couldn't seem to draw a full breath. What had I done wrong? What could I have possibly done to deserve such a cruel dismissal? The reason given was so simple, yet so absolute. Sarah's not comfortable with it. And just like that, with those few words, I was no longer a part of the family circle. I was an outsider, an inconvenience. That evening, I sat alone at my small kitchen table, slowly stirring a bowl of cold soup I had no appetite for, fighting back the tears that burned behind my eyes. Across the room, on the corner of the counter, sat the gift box, meticulously wrapped in paper decorated with smiling cartoon animals and tied with a perfect satin ribbon. It would not be given. It would not be received with joy. It would simply sit there, a silent monument to a grandmother's rejected love. It was an educational toy, one of those beautiful wooden block sets designed to help little hands and minds grow. I had spent hours choosing it, imagining the look on Leo's face when he saw it. I pictured his small, chubby fingers exploring the shapes and colors. I imagined his delighted squeal. How much would he love it? The thought had brought me so much joy in the preceding weeks. You see, all I ever really wanted, just once, was to hear him say, when he was old enough, "Thank you, Grandma." That was it. That was the whole of my desire. But it seemed even that small, simple wish was too much to ask. It would not be granted. I just wanted to see my grandson smile on his birthday. I wanted to stand beside my son Michael and my daughter-in-law Sarah, and have a picture taken together, a family portrait. Just the three of them, and me. A grandmother with her family. That was all. Was that so much to ask for? What was it about me that made me an unwelcome guest? This is the story of the saddest birthday of my life. A story of a heartbreak I experienced at the age of 73. My name is Evelyn Miller, and I am 73 years old. I live by myself in a quiet suburb just outside of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. It has been more than 20 years now since I lost my husband. He was a good, honest man, my Frank, but stomach cancer took him from me when he was only 65. From that day forward, my life has been, in the truest sense of the word, a solitary one. For most of my life, I was an elementary school teacher. There was no greater joy for me than watching the bright, smiling faces of children as they learned and grew. I stood at the front of a classroom for over 35 years, and on the day I finally retired at 65, I had to fight with all my might to hold back the tears. My entire life had been dedicated to education, so I was naturally a little anxious about what retirement would hold. But I had been careful with my money. I had managed to save up a respectable nest egg, about $85,000, and I felt secure that it would be enough to see me through my later years. However, that financial security was not meant to last. In a single, heartfelt moment, I gave it all away. It happened when my only son, Michael, decided to get married and was looking to buy his first home with his fiancée, Sarah. Mom. he said to me one evening, his voice hesitant. "We're a little short on the down payment. I hate to ask, but if there's any way you could help, Orchin." The moment I heard those words, I didn't hesitate. I walked to my desk, retrieved my bankbook, and handed it to him. "Of course, sweetheart," I said, my voice full of warmth and conviction. "This is for your new beginning, for the family you're building." Those were my words, and they came straight from my heart. At that moment, all I wanted was my son's happiness. I truly believed, without a shadow of a doubt, that having a new daughter in the family would bring so much light and joy into our lives. For the first few months after they were married, I lived with them in their new house. This was before Leo was born, and I fell into a comfortable routine of helping with the housework and cooking dinner each evening while they were at work. It felt right, like I was contributing, like I was needed. But after a while, I started to notice a subtle shift in the atmosphere, especially in the kitchen. When I would be at the stove, Sarah would come in and close the refrigerator door with just a little too much force. Sometimes she would make comments about the way I arranged the dishes in the cupboard. On one occasion, she said, in a tone that was polite on the surface but carried a sharp undercurrent, "You know, it's really just easier for us to manage these things ourselves." In front of Michael, Sarah was always smiling, always pleasant. But when it was just the two of us, she would often fall into a deep, pointed silence. That silence was heavy. It felt like an unvoiced request, a constant unspoken pressure. "When are you going to leave?" One night, I sat down with Michael after Sarah had gone to bed. "I've been thinking," I began carefully, "that maybe it's time for me to find my own little place." He looked a little surprised, but all he said was, "Oh. Well, okay, Mom. Whatever you think is best." He didn't say, "Please don't go." He didn't say, "We want you to stay." That, more than anything else, was what broke my heart. And so, a few weeks later, I rented a small, one-bedroom apartment in a complex about 2 miles away. The apartment itself was old and a bit cramped, but it was clean, and there was a lovely park just down the street, and a grocery store within walking distance. I had everything I needed. Still, I couldn't stay away. Once a week, every week, I would bake a batch of cookies or a coffee cake and bring it over to their house. The greatest reward of my week was ringing that doorbell and hearing a tiny voice from inside eventually start to chirp. "Grandma! Grandma!" That sound was music to my soul. I would help out while I was there. I'd fold a basket of laundry or scrub the bathrooms. I made it my mission to tidy up the house before they got home, exhausted from their long days at work, and then I would slip away quietly before they walked in. These small, nameless chores were, for me, a lifeline. Each folded towel, each wiped counter, was my way of spending time with my family, of being a part of their lives even from a distance. I never asked for anything in return. The occasional, "Thanks, Mom, this helps a lot," was more than enough to make me feel happy and valued. It was enough to keep me going. But deep down, in the quietest corners of my heart, I held on to a secret little wish, a question I was almost afraid to ask myself. If I were suddenly gone, would they miss me? Would my son feel a void? And for my grandson, for Leo, would I be remembered as the grandma he loved so much? That was all I hoped for. I prayed for it, quietly and desperately. That is why I never, ever could have imagined that a single text message, a few simple words on a glowing screen, could have the power to shatter my world so completely. Sometimes, especially on quiet afternoons, my mind drifts back to the past. I find myself remembering things with a clarity that feels almost painful. I remember the cold winter mornings when Michael was just a little boy. I would hold his tiny hand tightly in mine as we walked the few blocks to his kindergarten. The sun would barely be up, the air sharp and biting. I would take off one of my gloves and wrap my bare hand around his, trying to warm his cold fingers with my own body heat. "Are you warm enough, sweetie?" I'd ask. "We're almost there, just a little further." And he would look up at me, his face peeking out from under his woolen hat, and give me a bright, gap-toothed smile. "I'm okay, Mommy," he'd say. "As long as I'm with you, I'm okay. When he started elementary school, we would ride his bicycle together. He would pedal in the front, and I would sit on the small seat on the back, my arms around his waist. Even on days when it snowed, we'd make the trip. I'd be his shield against the wind, calling out encouragement as he navigated the slick patches on the sidewalk. Take your time, Michael. Be careful, don't slip. No need to rush. When he was accepted into a good junior high school, I bought him his first truly special gift. It was a beautiful fountain pen, a deep, glossy blue. I must have spent an hour in the stationery store, picking it up, feeling its weight, putting it back, then picking it up again. I finally chose the perfect one. I can still see the look on his face when I gave it to him. His eyes were wide with excitement. I'm going to study so hard with this, Mom, he promised, clutching it in his hand. Thank you. Decades have passed since those days. So many years. Now, I sit in this small apartment alone. I hold no one's hand. And sometimes, a thought, sharp as a shard of glass, pierces my mind. Back then, I was his shelter from the cold. Is he now content to leave me out in the storm? K. It was about a month before Leo's first birthday party. Michael stopped by my apartment on his way home from work. He sat on my sofa, looking a little tired, and said, Hey Mom, about Leo's birthday. Don't worry about planning anything, okay? Sarah's parents are going to take care of everything. His tone was gentle, casual even. There was nothing overtly malicious in his words, but they landed with a strange weight in my chest. A little seed of unease was planted. Oh, I said, forcing a smile. That's nice of them. Of course, whatever they want to do is fine. But as I said it, a wave of disappointment washed over me. I still wanted to do something, to contribute in a meaningful way. The only thing I could really offer, I figured, was money. So, without consulting anyone, I went to my bank the next day and transferred $2,800 from my savings account to Michael's. I sent him a short email afterward. Use this for the venue or the food for the party. Love, Mom. Days went by and I received no reply. I could see the little read receipt on the email, but there was nothing else, just silence. That's strange, I thought to myself, and that little seed of unease began to sprout, sending out tiny, anxious roots into my heart. Life went on as usual. I tried to convince myself that I was overthinking things, being a sensitive old woman. But as the date of the birthday grew closer, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The air around the subject felt different, charged with an unspoken tension. Then one afternoon, I ran into an old friend of mine at the grocery store. A woman who, by coincidence, is also a friend of Sarah's mother. We were chatting in the produce aisle when she said, completely out of the blue, "Oh, by the way, I heard about the big party for your grandson. They're having it at that beautiful rental villa down by the lake, aren't they? On the 15th, I think?" For a moment, my mind went completely blank. I felt a dizzying rush, as if the floor had dropped out from under me. "The 15th?" I repeated, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. "Oh dear," she said, her face falling. "You didn't know? I'm so sorry, Evelyn. I just assumed you would have been the first to know." I managed a weak smile and changed the subject, but inside, my growing anxiety was hardening into a cold, heavy certainty. I couldn't ignore it any longer. I had heard nothing from Michael or Sarah, not a word about the money I had sent, and now I knew they hadn't even bothered to tell me the date or the location of my own grandson's first birthday party. Michael's words from that day, "Mom, don't worry about it," now echoed in my mind, but their meaning had twisted. What once sounded like gentle reassurance now felt like a thinly veiled dismissal, a polite way of telling me to stay out of it. That night, I sat on my bed for a long time before composing another message to my son. I typed it out with trembling fingers. "Hi, sweetheart. Could you let me know what time the party starts on Saturday? Let me know if there's anything I can bring or any way I can help." The receipt appeared late the next morning, and then, nothing. I spent the rest of the day in a state of suspended animation. I opened and closed the messaging app on my phone countless times, my eyes fixed on that little checkmark that confirmed he had seen my words. I just stared, willing a reply to appear. I remember my fingertips felt numb and cold, and my hands were clenched so tightly in my lap that my knuckles were white. Why didn't I just call him? Why didn't I ask the question that was screaming inside my head? Am I invited? Do you want me there? Was it my pride as a mother that stopped me? Or was it simple cowardice? A deep-seated fear of hearing the answer I already knew to be true? I couldn't say. But somewhere in my soul, I think I already knew. I wasn't invited. I placed a hand over my heart, over the terrible, cold emptiness that had opened up inside me. I felt like I had dedicated my entire life to my son's happiness. In my own way, I had tried my very best to be a good mother, and then a good mother-in-law, to be supportive without being intrusive, to be present without being overbearing. And yet here I was, being quietly, methodically, and deliberately pushed out of the family I had helped to build. There was no other way to see it. And then the day came. The 15th. I didn't go anywhere. In my refrigerator sat a small, perfect chiffon cake that I had baked the day before. In my fantasy, I would have brought it to the party, placed a single candle in the top, and helped Leo blow it out. But instead, I sat alone in a chair by my living room window, staring blankly at the gray afternoon sky. Suddenly, my phone vibrated on the table beside me. I picked it up. A new message was on the screen. It contained only one line. "Mom, don't come to the party. Sarah's not comfortable with it." In that one brutal instant, everything became clear. I understood it all. I just sat there, staring at the phone, for a long time after I read it. I didn't move. I felt something wet and warm slide down my cheek, and it took me a moment to realize it was a tear. All I had ever wanted was the simple, pure joy of celebrating with them. I didn't need a fancy dinner or elaborate decorations. I just needed to hear someone say, "Evelyn, we're so glad you could make it." That's all the thanks I ever wanted. But those words never came. There was only silence, rejection, and a deep, profound sadness that settled over me like a shroud. When I first met Sarah, she was so polite, so kind and thoughtful. She always seemed to go out of her way to make me feel welcome. "Oh, Evelyn, please stay a little longer," she would say. "Your homemade stew is absolutely delicious. It's such a lifesaver on busy nights." Her words were always full of warmth, and I remember thinking with such relief, this is the one. She is a good person. Michael will be happy. But after Leo was born, I felt the atmosphere begin to change. I understood, of course. The exhaustion of a new mother, the sleepless nights, the emotional roller coaster. I had been through it myself. I tried to be patient and understanding, but day by day, the number of words she directed at me dwindled. We made eye contact less and less often. Slowly but surely, I began to feel that my very presence in their home was becoming an annoyance, a burden. One afternoon, I was sitting at their kitchen table, and I was struck by a sense of dissonance. Something was off. It was my chair, the chair by the window where I always sat. It wasn't there. In its place was Leo's stroller. "Oh," I said, pointing. "The stroller is here?" "Yes," Sarah replied without looking up from the baby. "The sun comes in this window so nicely. He sleeps really well here." I just nodded silently. It was a practical decision, a choice made for the baby's comfort. I told myself not to read anything more into it. You're feeling the hamey. But from that day on, I took to eating my meals on a small folding chair I set up in the corner of the kitchen, out of the way. One evening, Michael came home from work and asked me, "Was everything okay today, Mom?" "Oh yes," I said, trying to sound cheerful. Leo was a little angel. He was so good. But as I spoke, I felt a tiny thorn of resentment prick my heart. When, exactly, had I lost my place in this home? In this house that I had helped them buy? In this family I thought I was a part of? I now felt like little more than a hired housekeeper. Everything I did for the baby, all my efforts to help, now seemed to be reinterpreted as meddling, as unwelcome interference. Leo's laughter was the sweetest sound in the world, my one true solace. But it was a bittersweet joy, because right next to that beautiful sound, I felt myself becoming more and more invisible, fading quietly into the background of their lives. And so, it was then that I began, slowly and sadly, to prepare myself to leave for good. I believed, with all my heart, that it was the only way I could stop being an obstacle to my son's happiness. On the day of the party, I had dressed with such care. I'd bought a special chiffon cake from my favorite local bakery and wrapped up a canister of fine tea to go with it. I put on a beautiful dress, one I had been saving for a special occasion, and quietly left my apartment. My small tote bag felt heavy with more than just the cake and tea. It was filled with all my hopes and tender feelings. My heart was pounding with anticipation, and no meaty, with the memory of the first time I held my grandson Leo. As I stepped outside, a light drizzle was falling, and the cool night air pricked at my skin. But I didn't mind. My steps felt light, and my spirit was warm, as if I were on my way to celebrate a special day that belonged only to me. The day I celebrated being a mother and a grandmother. When I arrived at the hotel, the entrance was a dazzling spectacle of light and activity. A magnificent crystal chandelier glittered overhead, casting a warm glow on the bustling crowd below. People were laughing, embracing, and posing for pictures, their faces alight with joy and celebration. For a moment, the sight of it all, the laughter, the warm light, the sheer happiness of the occasion, sent a pang of such sharp, piercing sadness through me that it almost took my breath away. A quiet, insistent question began to whisper in the back of my mind. On the day of my precious grandson's very first birthday, a day so full of love and promise, was this truly a place where I belonged? The doubt coiled in my stomach, cold and heavy, but I pushed it down. I had to. I took a slow, steadying breath and gave myself a silent little pep talk, a grandmother's gentle command. It's all right, Evelyn. You're just here to celebrate your grandson, the same as you've always done. Tay. With that resolve, I straightened my shoulders and began to walk toward the main reception desk. A large, professionally printed sign stood on an easel nearby, its cheerful, glittering letters spelling out, "Happy First Birthday." The light reflecting off the glitter felt almost painfully bright, making me squint. I approached the young woman at the desk and offered her my warmest, most genuine smile. "Good evening," I began, my voice soft. I'm the baby's grandmother. On his mother's side, I've just brought a small cake to help with the celebration." The receptionist, a polite young woman with a neat ponytail, gave my bag a brief, disinterested glance before her eyes flicked down to a clipboard in front of her. A small frown creased her brow. Her expression shifted from professional courtesy to one of cautious concern. "I'm very sorry, ma'am," she said, her tone suddenly formal, "but I don't seem to see your name on the guest list. Could you please confirm your reservation details?" Her words, though spoken quietly, landed like blocks of ice in my chest. Each syllable seemed to echo in the suddenly vast and silent lobby. For a moment I couldn't find my voice. I could only manage to stammer, a choked, desperate sound. My name isn't there? Are you sure? Could you please check again?" The young woman shook her head, a gesture of polite but firm finality. She didn't even bother to look at her phone or a computer screen to double-check. "I'm so sorry," she repeated, her voice now tinged with an unmistakable note of dismissal. "We cannot permit entry to anyone who does not have an official invitation." As she spoke, her eyes darted past me, making brief, significant contact with a taller staff member standing near the entrance to the hall. It was a subtle, silent signal, a gesture I understood all too well. I was to go no further. I took a half step back, and then I stopped. My feet felt as though they had been encased in concrete. I couldn't move. Outside, the sky was a deep, starless black, and a cold, persistent rain had begun to fall, the drops striking my face like tiny, stinging needles. My fingertips, clenched around the handle of my tote bag, had started to tremble uncontrollably. In my mind, a frantic reel of memories began to play, sharp and vivid. I saw my grandson Leo, just a few months ago, sitting on the living room floor surrounded by his colorful building blocks. I remembered the day we were building a tower together, and when it tumbled down with a gentle clatter, he had thrown his head back and let out a peal of the most wonderful, unrestrained laughter. "Again, Grandma," he had gurgled, clapping his chubby hands together. "Again." His smile on that day, it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. I was so looking forward to seeing that smile again today, I thought. A fresh wave of pain washing over me, the memory of that innocent, joyous face wouldn't leave me, and the ache in my chest became almost unbearable. With fumbling hands, I pulled my phone from my purse, my fingers slick with rain. "Michael," I whispered to myself, my voice breaking. "I have to call Michael." I scrolled to his number and pressed the call button, my heart hammering against my ribs. It rang once, twice, and then went dead. Not to voicemail, just dead. He had declined the call. At that moment, a car turned the corner, its headlights sweeping across the street and illuminating me for a brief, harsh second. In that unforgiving light, I must have looked like a ghost, my face a pale, lank mask of disbelief. I just stood there, rooted to the spot, a woman whose world had just gone dark. From a distance, I could hear it, a sound that was both the sweetest music and the most profound torture. It was Leo's laughter, filtering through the glass doors of the party room. I could just make out his small form through the transparent pane. I saw him sitting in his high chair, a tiny cake with a single, flickering candle in front of him. I saw my daughter-in-law, Sarah, leaning over him, her arms wrapped around him in a gentle, protective embrace. I could almost hear her voice calling his name, a soft, loving murmur. And I just stood there, watching it all. A single, fleeting moment of my grandson's life, a moment I was not a part of. My name was not on the list. My name would not be called. My chest felt so tight, I thought it might crack. The words were gone. I had nothing left to say. Turning my back on the warm, protected light of the hotel, I walked away, out into the steadily falling rain. People brushed past me, hurrying inside, oblivious, disappearing into the celebration as if nothing was wrong in the world. But for me, there was only the cold and the wet. The hem of my beautiful dress was soaked and heavy, dragging against the pavement. I walked slowly, pausing every few steps to look back, though I don't know what I was hoping to see. I found a wooden bench under a large oak tree a short distance down the street, and sank onto it. Reaching into my tote bag, I pulled out the small chiffon cake from the bakery. I unwrapped it carefully. It was a beautiful little thing, decorated with fresh, perfect strawberries arranged in a delicate pattern on top, his favorite. Through a blur of tears that mixed with the raindrops on my face, I took a small bite. Just one. My own small, solitary portion of the celebration. Just then, the headlights of a taxi waiting at the corner seemed to flare up, impossibly bright. The light caught the falling raindrops, making them shimmer and dance like 1,000 tiny diamonds. I reached into my purse again, and my fingers closed around my keychain. Attached to it was a small plastic photo frame holding a picture of Leo, taken when he was just a few weeks old, his face crinkled into a gummy, happy smile. I squeezed it tightly in my palm, the sharp plastic corners digging into my skin. "Maybe," I whispered to the empty, rainy street. "This just isn't my place anymore." I put my phone away, tucked the half-eaten cake back into its box, and slowly, stiffly, got to my feet. I allowed myself one last glance back toward the hotel. Through the glass, I could still see them. The image of my son, his wife, and their child, smiling, a perfect family portrait bathed in warm, golden light. But there was no path for me to enter that circle. There was no room for me in that picture. With a quiet sigh that was more like a surrender, I bowed my head and turned away from the hotel for good. The rain showed no signs of stopping. My dress was completely ruined, my hair was plastered to my head, and my shoulders felt heavy and chilled to the bone. But it was my heart that felt the wettest, soaked through with a sorrow so deep it felt like it would never dry. Deep in the bottom of my purse, tucked into a side pocket, is a small muslin cloth, folded neatly into a perfect square. It hasn't been properly washed in a very long time. It's a burp cloth, the one I used to gently wipe the dribbles of milk from. Leo's chin after his bottle when he was just a tiny infant. If I hold it close, I can still smell it. A faint, sweet, lingering scent of baby formula. That smell alone is enough to bring a fragile warmth back into my chest. Sometimes, in the long, quiet hours of the night, I'll wake up suddenly, my heart aching with a loneliness I can't name. On those nights, I get out of bed, walk to my dresser, and pull open the top drawer. I take out the little muslin cloth, bring it to my face, and just breathe it in. My eyes closed tight. Boy! This scent, I think to myself, my throat tightening, this might be the last proof I have that I was ever really his grandma. The thought always makes my eyes burn, a familiar heat rising behind them. I don't receive photos of him anymore. His cheerful, babbling voice no longer comes through the phone, but this one small, worn piece of fabric, it alone holds the memory of his tiny, warm body in my arms, the memory of a happiness so pure it feels like it must have belonged to someone else. And so, I continue to keep it, to hold it cupped in both my hands as if it were a fragile prayer, to cherish it more than anything else I own. That night, I replayed every single moment in my head, a torturous loop of hope and despair. I remembered how I had picked up the custom-made chiffon cake from my favorite local bakery and carefully wrapped the canister of imported celebration tea. I remembered putting on the beautiful dress I had saved, a soft floral print, and stepping quietly out of my own front door. The small tote bag in my hand felt heavy, not with the weight of its contents, but with the sheer density of my affection, my eager anticipation. My heart had been pounding with an excitement that mirrored the thrill I felt the very first day I met my grandson, my little Leo. As I walked down the stairs from my apartment, I felt the cool night air and the light mist of rain on my skin. It didn't dampen my spirits. My steps were light, my heart was warm. It felt as if I was on my way to celebrate a private, sacred holiday that belonged only to me. The day I got to be a mother and a grandmother all at once. When I reached the hotel's grand entrance, I was met with a dazzling scene of luxurious decorations and the cheerful din of a happy crowd. A magnificent crystal chandelier hung from the high ceiling, its light scattering in 1,000 brilliant directions, illuminating the smiling faces of the guests below as they celebrated and took pictures. For a moment, the sight of it all, the laughter, the warm light, the sheer happiness of the occasion sent a pang of such sharp, piercing sadness through me that it almost took my breath away. On the day of my precious grandson's very first birthday, a day so full of love and promise, was this truly a place where I belonged? The doubt coiled in my stomach, cold and heavy. But I pushed it down. I had to. I took a slow, steadying breath and gave myself a silent little pep talk, a grandmother's gentle command. It's all right, Evelyn. You're just here to celebrate your grandson, the same as you've always done. With that resolve, I straightened my shoulders and began to walk toward the reception desk. A large, professionally printed sign stood on an easel nearby, its cheerful, glittering letters spelling out, "Happy first birthday." The light reflecting off the glitter felt almost painfully bright, making me squint. I approached the young woman at the desk and offered her my warmest, most genuine smile. "Good evening," I began, my voice soft. I'm the baby's grandmother. You know, on his mother's side. I've just brought a small cake to help with the celebration." The receptionist, a polite young woman with a neat ponytail, gave my bag a brief, disinterested glance before her eyes flicked down to a clipboard in front of her. A small frown creased her brow. Her expression shifted from professional courtesy to one of cautious concern. "I'm very sorry, ma'am," she said, her tone suddenly formal, "but I don't seem to see your name on the guest list. Could you please confirm your reservation details?" Her words, though spoken quietly, landed like blocks of ice in my chest. Each syllable seemed to echo in the suddenly vast and silent lobby. For a moment, I couldn't find my voice. I could only manage to stammer, a choked, desperate sound. My name isn't there? Are you sure? Could you please check again?" The young woman shook her head, a gesture of polite but firm finality. She didn't even bother to look at her phone or a computer screen to double-check. "I'm so sorry," she repeated, her voice now tinged with an unmistakable note of dismissal. "We cannot permit entry to anyone who does not have an official invitation." As she spoke, her eyes darted past me, making brief, significant contact with a taller staff member standing near the entrance to the hall. It was a subtle, silent signal, a gesture I understood all too well. I was to go no further. I took a half step back, and then I stopped. My feet felt as though they had been encased in concrete. I couldn't move. Outside, the sky was a deep, starless black, and a cold, persistent rain had begun to fall, the drops striking my face like tiny, stinging needles. My fingertips, clenched around the handle of my tote bag, had started to tremble uncontrollably. In my mind, a frantic reel of memories began to play, sharp and vivid. I saw my grandson Leo, just a few months ago, sitting on the living room floor surrounded by his colorful building blocks. I remembered the day we were building a tower together, and when it tumbled down with a gentle clatter, he had thrown his head back and let out a peal of the most wonderful, unrestrained laughter. "Again, Grandma," he had gurgled, clapping his chubby hands together. "Again!" His smile on that day, it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. I was so looking forward to seeing that smile again today, I thought, a fresh wave of pain washing over me. The memory of that innocent, joyous face wouldn't leave me, and the ache in my chest became almost unbearable. With fumbling hands, I pulled my phone from my purse, my fingers slick with rain. "Michael," I whispered to myself, my voice breaking. "I have to call Michael." I scrolled to his number and pressed the call button, my heart hammering against my ribs. It rang once, twice, and then went dead. Not to voicemail, just dead. He had declined the call. At that moment, a car turned the corner, its headlights sweeping across the street and illuminating me for a brief, harsh second. In that unforgiving light, I must have looked like a ghost, my face a pale, blank mask of disbelief. I just stood there, rooted to the spot, a woman whose world had just gone dark. From a distance, I could hear it, a sound that was both the sweetest music and the most profound torture. It was Leo's laughter, filtering through the glass doors of the party room. I could just make out his small form through the transparent pane. I saw him sitting in his high chair, a tiny cake with a single, flickering candle in front of him. I saw my daughter-in-law Sarah, leaning over him, her arms wrapped around him in a gentle, protective embrace. I could almost hear her voice calling his name, a soft, loving murmur. And I just stood there, watching it all. A single, fleeting moment of my grandson's life, a moment I was not a part of. My name was not on the list. My name would not be called. My chest felt so tight I thought it might crack. The words were gone. I had nothing left to say. Turning my back on the warm, protected light of the hotel, I walked away, out into the steadily falling rain. People brushed past me, hurrying inside, oblivious, disappearing into the celebration as if nothing was wrong in the world. But for me, there was only the cold and the wet. The hem of my beautiful dress was soaked and heavy, dragging against the pavement. I walked slowly, pausing every few steps to look back. Though I don't know what I was hoping to see. I found a wooden bench under a large oak tree, a short distance down the street, and sank onto it. Reaching into my tote bag, I pulled out the small chiffon cake from the bakery. I unwrapped it carefully. It was a beautiful little thing, decorated with fresh, perfect strawberries arranged in a delicate pattern on top. His favorite. Through a blur of tears that mixed with the raindrops on my face, I took a small bite. Just one. My own small, solitary portion of the celebration. Just then, the headlights of a taxi waiting at the corner seemed to flare up, impossibly bright. The light caught the falling raindrops, making them shimmer and dance like 1,000 tiny diamonds. I reached into my purse again and my fingers closed around my keychain. Attached to it was a small plastic photo frame holding a picture of Leo, taken when he was just a few weeks old, his face crinkled into a gummy, happy smile. I squeezed it tightly in my palm, the sharp plastic corners digging into my skin. "Maybe," I whispered to the empty, rainy street, This just isn't my place anymore. I put my phone away, tucked the half-eaten cake back into its box, and slowly, stiffly, got to my feet. I allowed myself one last glance back toward the hotel. Through the glass, I could still see them. The image of my son, his wife, and their child, smiling. A perfect family portrait bathed in warm, golden light. But there was no path for me to enter that circle. There was no room for me in that picture. With a quiet sigh that was more like a surrender, I bowed my head and turned away from the hotel for good. The rain showed no signs of stopping. My dress was completely ruined, my hair was plastered to my head, and my shoulders felt heavy and chilled to the bone. But it was my heart that felt the wettest, soaked through with a sorrow so deep, it felt like it would never dry. Deep in the bottom of my purse, tucked into a side pocket, is a small muslin cloth, folded neatly into a perfect square. It hasn't been properly washed in a very long time. It's a Burke cloth, the one I used to gently wipe the dribbles of milk from Leo's chin after his bottle when he was just a tiny infant. If I hold it close, I can still smell it. A faint, sweet, lingering scent of baby formula. That smell alone is enough to bring a fragile warmth back into my chest. Sometimes, in the long, quiet hours of the night, I'll wake up suddenly, my heart aching with a loneliness I can't name. On those nights, I get out of bed, walk to my dresser, and pull open the top drawer. I take out the little muslin cloth, bring it to my face, and just breathe it in. My eyes close tight. This scent, I think to myself, my throat tightening, this might be the last proof I have that I was ever really his grandma. The thought always makes my eyes burn, a familiar heat rising behind them. I don't receive photos of him anymore. His cheerful, babbling voice no longer comes through the phone. But this one small, worn piece of fabric, it alone holds the memory of his tiny, warm body in my arms. The memory of a happiness so pure, it feels like it must have belonged to someone else. And so, I continue to keep it. To hold it cupped in both my hands as if it were a fragile prayer. To cherish it more than anything else I own. That night, I couldn't sleep. I just lay in my bed, opening and closing my eyes, listening to the relentless ticking of the clock on my nightstand. Each tick seemed to mark another second, pulling me further away from my grandson. His smile, his little cries, the feel of his hand in mine, it all felt like it was receding, fading into a cold, distant past, leaving a terrible chill deep inside my chest. "Why?" I whispered into the darkness. All I ever wanted was to celebrate with him. That's all. The next morning, I went to check the mail, my movements slow and mechanical. There, nestled amongst the usual junk mail and bills, was a single, crisp, white envelope. There was no return address, no stamp. It had been delivered by hand. Written on the front in my son's familiar, slightly hesitant script were just 2 words, "To Mom." I snatched it from the box, my breath catching in my throat. I clutched it to my chest with both hands and felt my knees go weak. I sank down right there on the floor of my entryway, my heart pounding a frantic, painful rhythm against my ribs. I felt like I couldn't breathe. My fingers trembled as I fumbled with the seal, a chaotic mix of hope and terror warring inside me. The letter inside was short, just 3 lines of text. The handwriting was gentle, but the words themselves felt weak, evasive. "Mom, I am so sorry about yesterday. But Sarah said that your being there would make the atmosphere unpleasant and I just didn't know what to do." As I read those words, I felt something inside me shatter. It was a physical sensation, a deep, structural collapse in the very core of my being. It was as if my entire existence, my whole identity as a mother and a grandmother, had been reduced to nothing more than a flimsy piece of paper, easily crumpled and tossed aside. Do I not have a place in this family anymore? I let the letter fall into my lap and closed my eyes, slumping against the wall. The apartment was completely silent. The only movement was the soft morning light filtering through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. But despite the gentle light, all I felt inside was a cold, spreading darkness. What did I do wrong? What was my crime? I just wanted to be there for my grandson's first birthday. I wanted to celebrate with my family. The tears began to fall then, hot and silent, and they wouldn't stop. I picked up the white envelope again and read the letter over and over, as if the words might change. But they never did. It was an apology, yes, but it was also a rejection, a heavy, unyielding reality that I could no longer deny. The room was as quiet as if the power had been cut. I just sat there on the floor, stunned, feeling as if time itself had stopped. And in that frozen moment, a memory came back to me with perfect, painful clarity. I remembered the day Leo took his first wobbly steps. I was there, sitting on the floor, my arms outstretched, a huge smile on my face. He took one step, then another, and then he tumbled forward, his tiny hand landing perfectly in my own. I had caught him. But now, it felt as if that small hand was a million miles away, impossibly out of reach. Was everything I did? Was it all a mistake? The question was a raw, agonizing cry that I couldn't hold back. It wasn't, was it? It can't have been. But the silent morning air offered no answer. There was only the sunlight, bathing me in a warmth I could not feel. From that day on, I was trapped in a profound sense of loneliness and self-loathing. When I looked at my own reflection in the mirror, the face staring back felt like that of a stranger, distant and unfamiliar. At night, I found myself falling into a heartbreaking new routine. I would set the dinner table with 3 place settings. One for me, one for my son, Michael, and one for his son, my beautiful grandson, Leo. Logically, I knew they would not be coming. I understood that. But my hands seemed to have a will of their own, moving out of habit, out of a desperate, foolish hope. Maybe tonight, some small, stubborn part of me would whisper, maybe they'll stop by tonight. And so, I would sit, watching the steam rise from a pot of soup, with 2 empty chairs sitting silently at my table. After a while, when the food had grown cold, I would quietly clear away the 2 untouched place settings, without a word, without a thought. There was only that familiar, tight, squeezing sensation deep in my chest. I never wanted to be thanked. I never needed to be praised. All I ever wanted was to be allowed to be theirs, to exist as a member of the family, as Michael's mother. It was as simple and as essential as breathing. But even that small, fundamental wish went unanswered. Maybe, I thought, the realization settling over me with a soul-crushing weight. In my son's world, I don't even exist anymore. The thought filled me with an emptiness so vast it felt like it might consume me entirely. I couldn't let it end like this. Carrying all my confusion and sorrow, I knew I had to do something to change the situation, to understand. And so, I made a decision. I will go and speak to Sarah's mother directly. Perhaps it was all just a terrible misunderstanding. Perhaps I had done something to offend them without even realizing it. Clinging to that sliver of hope, I sat down and composed a careful, polite letter, requesting a time when I might be able to visit her. We set a date. When the day arrived, I walked to her home, a beautiful house made of white brick. My hand trembled slightly as I reached out to ring the doorbell. After a moment, the door opened. She stood there, looking at me with a clear, undisguised expression of surprise on her face. "Well, what is it? Can I help you with something?" I asked, bowing my head politely. "I am so sorry to bother you so unexpectedly," she began. "There's something I need to talk to you about, if you could spare just a moment." She seemed to consider it for a second, then gestured reluctantly toward the inside of her house. "Please, come in," she said. We sat on the plush sofas in her living room, and after taking a deep breath, I lowered my head and began to speak. "I've come about the birthday party the other day," I said, my voice quiet but steady. I feel I have to know the reason why I wasn't invited." She gave a short, bitter-sounding laugh and picked up her teacup. "If you want me to be honest," she said, not quite meeting my eyes, "it's because you're a little out of touch, Evelyn. The way you speak, the clothes you wear, everything about you. It's all a bit dated." I was stunned. I truly couldn't believe it. I never imagined someone would say something so blunt, So cruel, straight to my face. But I contributed to the cost of the venue and the food, I stammered, my mind reeling. I helped pay for the party. Even so, what was the reason I was excluded? A cold smile touched her lips. Just because you contribute money doesn't automatically mean you get an invitation, does it? She said, her voice dripping with condescension. Our family places a great deal of importance on the overall atmosphere of an event. Her words felt like a slap. I squeezed my hands together in my lap, my knuckles turning white. All I wanted was to see my grandson grow, I said, the words catching in my throat. It was a special day, and I just wanted to be near him. That was my only wish. She finally looked away, letting out an audible sigh of impatience. Look, I understand how you feel, I really do, she said, her tone softening into a kind of weary condescension. But my daughter is a very sensitive person. She worries constantly about what other people think. Please, just try to understand that she didn't mean anything malicious by it. On the walk home from her house, my feet felt heavy, as if I were dragging them through wet sand. My mind was a numb, buzzing void. It was then that I heard a familiar voice call out to me. Excuse me, you're the boy's former mother-in-law, aren't you? I turned. The man speaking to me was Sarah's biological father. I had heard that he and her mother had divorced years ago, so I was surprised to see him. He approached me slowly and began to speak in a quiet, measured voice. You know, he said, a sad, knowing look in his eyes, I was treated the same way, as someone they didn't want to be seen with. For the longest time, I tormented myself, wondering what I had done wrong. What was so terrible about me? He paused, shaking his head slightly. But in the end, I realized it was never about me. It was about them. It was about their need to create a perfect picture. Anything they don't like, any part of the background that doesn't fit their ideal, just gets cropped out of the frame. It's as simple and as brutal as that. I stood there on the sidewalk, completely frozen. The world seemed to stop around me. So, you're saying, I wasn't rejected, I was just edited out? Why? The words came out as a whisper. He nodded slowly. That's right, he said. It's not that there's anything wrong with you as a person. You were just excluded for not being modern enough. It's a sad time we live in, isn't it? When I heard him say that, I felt a strange sense of release, as if a great weight I didn't even know I was carrying had been lifted from my shoulders. I wasn't a bad mother after all. I was just noise in their fantasy of a perfect life. When I finally got back to my apartment, I sat down in my favorite armchair and, for the first time in a very long time, I cried. But these weren't tears of frustration or anger. They were tears of pure, unadulterated grief, a deep, pent-up sadness that had been locked away in my heart for years, finally allowed to flow free. All I ever wanted was to be a family. I repeated the silent, desperate thought over and over in my mind, a prayer to no one. On my way home, I had stopped for a moment, letting the cold winter wind sting my cheeks as I stared up at the blank gray sky. What have I been working so hard for all these years? A slow, hot anger began to well up from the deepest part of my soul. I had never once asked for anything in return. All I ever wanted was to be quietly, gently, a part of my family's life. I had used the retirement fund I had painstakingly saved for over a decade to help my son buy his house. I had driven to their home every single week to help care for my grandson. I did their laundry, I cleaned their bathrooms, I cooked their meals. And in return for all of that, I was cast aside as an embarrassment, someone who didn't fit in, all because I wouldn't look right in their perfect picture. Without even realizing it, my hands had clenched into tight fists at my sides. How dare they? I didn't say the words out loud, but they screamed inside my head. I am not someone's accessory. I am not a piece of background scenery. I am a human being. I am a mother. And I am a grandmother. That night, after I returned home, I sat in front of the bathroom mirror and stared at my own reflection for a long, long time. This wrinkled face, this slightly stooped back every line, Every ache was a testament to the years I had dedicated to my family. There was not a single thing about it that I should ever be ashamed of. I can't be the mother who just suffers in silence anymore. I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones that I could no longer go on pretending that everything was fine. I began to think about my next move. Should I try to have one last, honest conversation with them before our relationship shattered completely? Or was it time to draw a line in the sand to protect what was left of my own life, my own dignity? Deep in my heart, a tiny flame, quiet but persistent, began to flicker to life. I would find my voice again, as a mother and as a person. After that day, I never initiated contact again. I didn't call, I didn't text, I didn't write, even if it meant I would be misunderstood forever. Even if they were to slander my name, I simply had no words left to offer them. There was, however, one habit I did not change. On the first day of every single month, I went to the bank and deposited $100 into the savings account I had opened in my grandson's name. In the memo line of the transfer, I never wrote gift money. I only ever wrote 2 words, for safekeeping. The only things I had left of him were a small, wallet-sized photograph and a little gauze handkerchief he had used when he was 6 months old. A faint, sweet scent of milk and soap still clung to the fabric. Every now and then, I would take it out of my drawer, close my eyes, and press it gently to my cheek. It was the last tangible connection I had to my role as a grandmother. It was my final anchor. The seasons turned, and spring arrived once more. One afternoon, as the sweet scent of the lilac bushes blooming on my small balcony drifted into the apartment, I was in the kitchen, rolling out dough for molasses cookies. That's when the intercom buzzed. On the small screen, I saw a familiar face. It was my son, Michael. What is it? On that day, when my son fell to his knees on my small kitchen floor and bowed his head, I could only stand there, watching the back of the man he had become. "I'm so sorry, Mom." His voice was trembling. It was the voice of a little boy, stripped bare of all the pretense he had been hiding behind. "I knew you were all alone, that you were lonely. I knew it, and I pretended not to see it. I was so caught up in the idea of protecting my families that all I could think about was my own position, my own relationship with my wife." I listened in silence. "You were always on my side, Mom," he continued, his voice thick with unshed tears. "When I was deciding on a college, when I was lost about my career, you supported me through everything, and I pushed you away, treated you like you were some kind of inconvenient problem I had to manage." He finally lifted his head and looked me straight in the eye. "I was too weak to stop Sarah from pushing you away. I couldn't find the words to defend you. It was all my fault. My weakness. I'm the one who hurt our family." As I listened to his confession, I felt a faint, cracking sound deep within my chest, like ice that had been frozen for years finally beginning to thaw. At the same time, according to what Michael told me, Sarah's behavior had also started to change after that day. She's been thinking about you a lot, Mom," he explained. "I think she was just so desperate to please her own mother, so obsessed with how things looked to the outside world that she started to see you as some kind of obstacle. She says she regrets it more than anything." He told me that recently, when their son, Leo, had been crying, saying over and over that he wanted to see Grandma, Sarah had finally understood. She realized just how important my presence had been to their family all along. He also told me that she had found the old bank statements, had seen the records of the $100 deposits I had been making every month without fail, and had sat there and wept in silence. Perhaps forgiveness isn't something you decide to give. Perhaps it is something that is born in your heart, naturally and quietly, in the very moment you witness another person's sincere remorse. Hearing his words, I slowly rose to my feet and walked to the old hall closet. From the top shelf, I retrieved a small wooden box. Inside were a few faded photographs of my late husband, and the handkerchief that he and I had embroidered together when we were still young. I carefully selected one of the handkerchiefs from the box and placed it gently into my son's hand. It was an old one, embroidered with a pattern of flowers, the last gift my husband had given to me before he passed away. "For your mother," he had whispered. "Take this," I said, my voice soft but firm, "and use it to start putting your family back together again." For the first time in years, I reached out and took his hand, squeezing it tightly. "No matter what she thought of me," I said, looking directly into his eyes, "as your mother, I have never stopped loving you, but I also need you to understand just how deeply you hurt me." My son nodded, his eyes shining with tears, and squeezed my hand back, hard. After a long, heavy silence, he spoke again, his voice barely a whisper. "Mom, will you see him? Leo, he's asking for you. He says he wants to see you right now." I didn't answer right away. I just closed my eyes for a moment. Then, my gaze drifted toward the kitchen counter, where the unbaked molasses cookies were still lined up neatly on a baking sheet. "Well then," I said, a small, sad smile touching my lips. "Why don't we bring these with us? They might be a little too sweet, but I'm sure your son will love them." In that instant, it felt as though time had rewound, and the tight, painful knot that had been binding us together for so long finally began to loosen. For the first time in 6 years, I wrapped my arms around my son and held him. He had gotten a little thinner, but his back was just as I remembered it, broad and warm. And deep inside my chest, I could hear the sound of a long, maternal silence finally coming to an end. I did not attend my grandson's first birthday party. On that day, I stood alone in my small kitchen, brewed a single cup of tea, and, out of habit, set 3 pairs of chopsticks on the table. One for me, one for my son, and one for my grandson. It was only after I had laid them out that I would remember. They aren't coming today. Ah. My fingertips remembered the routine even when my mind knew the truth. Still, doing it felt like some small, private form of redemption. Then, leaving only my own set, I would quietly put the other 2 away. But then, 2 years later, in the early spring, just as the first cherry blossoms began to bloom, an envelope arrived from my son. Inside was an invitation to his son's kindergarten orientation, along with a handwritten note. "To Mom, if you're willing, please come. And maybe we can make up for that day, too." A moment I read those words, a warmth spread through my chest, so intense it made my fingertips tremble. I took a deep breath and read the letter again. Together. That one word felt like it was slowly dissolving all the pain of the past. On the day of the orientation, I opened my old cedar chest for the first time in ages and took out a pale lavender dress suit, carefully shaking out the folds. As I straightened the collar in the mirror, I asked my reflection a quiet question. "Do you think I'll be able to get through today without crying?" When I arrived at the school, I saw a small back in a crisp new uniform. The moment he saw me, his eyes went wide with a moment of confusion, but then his face broke into a brilliant smile. "Grandma!" he shouted, and came running toward me. In that instant, all the strength left my legs. I sank to my knees and wrapped him in the tightest hug I could manage. The faint smell of milk, the warmth of his small hand, the softness of his hair against my cheek. Oh, this feeling. This was what I had missed so desperately. When I finally looked up, my daughter-in-law was standing there, watching me in silence. She didn't say a word, but she gave a long, deep nod, her head bowed in a gesture that said more than words ever could. There was a world of meaning in that silent apology. "Thank you," I whispered, and I could see the faint shimmer of tears in her own eyes. On the way home, I walked with my grandson, his hand held tightly in mine, down a street lined with blossoming dogwood trees. His small hand squeezed my fingers back. "Grandma, thank you for coming today." His small voice seeped into the very bottom of my heart. The rain on that awful night, the cold that soaked through to my bones, the profound loneliness I felt in that moment, that all of it had been leading me here. For the first time, I understood that being understood by another person can be a form of salvation. I had never wanted anything grand. I only wanted for my status as a mother, as a part of this family, to not be denied. I no longer need applause or praise. The fact that I am this child's grandma and this family's mother is all the proof of my worth that I will ever need. Believing that this is not an ending, but a new beginning, I think I will try setting 3 pairs of chopsticks on the table again. This time I will do it with a prayer that one day soon, all of them will be used. Not everything changed overnight, but I can feel that something has started to shift, slowly but surely. I no longer blame them for the sadness I felt back then, nor do I hold any resentment for the past. Everyone at some point in their lives loves imperfectly. I believe that was true for my daughter-in-law, and it was true for me. Now, my grandson calls me on the phone sometimes. Even if it's just for a short conversation, hearing his voice is enough to warm my heart. Grandma, let's go see the flowers together again soon, okay? Oh, that alone is enough to make me happy. My son has also become much more honest and open than before. I have accepted his regret and his confusion, and I hold them gently in my heart. And my daughter-in-law, even though we don't say much, I don't miss the quiet, "thank you," that I can see in her gentle gaze. I have enough. I don't need honor or praise or anything else. The simple knowledge that I am allowed to exist here, as a part of this family, as a mother, is the greatest gift of all. The welcome home, and I'm home. That took so many long years to find, I want. While, to believe that it is never too late to reclaim them. And now, a word for you who are watching this video right now. Perhaps you too, without even realizing it, have pushed your parents or other loved ones away from important moments. Maybe it was for reasons like, it would be embarrassing, or they're awkward to talk to, or it's just too much trouble. A family does not have to be perfect. Even if it's messy, even if you've hurt each other. As long as you can find forgiveness and kindness on the other side, you can always start over. Tonight, please, just for a moment, turn your thoughts quietly to the family you hold in your heart. If this story has lit even a small candle in your own heart, please let us know in the comments. Even just writing, "I will not exclude my parents from my life," might be enough to save someone else's heart. And if you follow this channel, we will continue to bring you gentle stories about family, forgiveness, and the meaning of home. An apology that comes too late, a clumsy "thank you," and a quiet "I'm home." I truly believe that these simple things can become the miracles that change a life. Thank you so very much for watching.